Okay, our next speaker, Kevin Garcia. This is his sixth Nerd Night talk. Big round of applause for Kevin.
I always want to do that on a mic. This is the so-called death whistle, although it's still debated exactly what it is. It definitely does that. But yeah, this is my sixth time here. I have done this a lot. One of those times was during the pandemic, so distantly. And I think if you go back and watch that video, I hadn't got a haircut in like 6 months at that point. But anyway, so when Mickey asked about relics, and I'm thinking about, like we were talking a second ago, relics that are human body parts of somebody that was maybe a martyr, somebody venerated, and I want to get you something that is a body part from somebody, but it's not important who that person was. What's really important is who that person was. Let me explain. First off, for who I am, my name is Kevin Garcia. I've been a teacher for many years, been a writer for many years. For 10 years, I was a researcher for Marvel Comics. I got paid to read comic books. Whenever I had the opportunity, I would write about Marvel's Mesoamerican gods, because they have a lot of gods. Thor is not the only one. I also work for other companies and publish other things. I just had a children's book came out recently where the family of the real-life wrestlers, Dragon Lee and his family, hired me to do a story about them as kids fighting monsters. So I have them fighting monsters from Mesoamerica, monsters that existed, or were believed in rather, before the Spaniards ever got there. That was important to me. I also did a comic a couple years ago called Teotihuacan, and it takes place before the founding of Tenochtitlan. This is a time period that's very near and dear to my heart, is the main thing. All right. So I want to talk about a relic, and when I talk about skulls and I talk about Mesoamerica, people often think of the crystal skulls. And the thing is, these are probably all fakes. I say probably because they were all made, most likely, in the middle 1800s and sold as things that were in Mesoamerica when they weren't. But they look kind of cool. I'll give them that. But what we really have is this guy right here. Now, this is the Mask of Tezcatlipoca. And that is indeed a human skull that was turned into a mask that you could wear. Would you? As for who Tezcatlipoca is, he is basically if you mixed Loki with Odin. All right, he's a trickster god, but also probably the most powerful god. I put some of his titles here. He's god of tricks, god of night, god of jaguars, god of all creation. We'll get to that. And by the way, I'm going to tell some stories that are related to why he's so important. But I want to emphasize that there is not a single, this is the way that these stories were told. For one thing, you're talking about some things that are oral tradition. For another, you're talking about things that were passed down for centuries, thousands of years, and it's going to change depending on the region, depending on the time. So I've seen people online that'll talk like, this is exactly how it is, and anybody who disagrees with them is wrong, and that's just not how it works. So these are versions that most fit what I'm talking about, the ones that I'll focus on this guy. All right. So he has a lot of titles. Tezcatlipoca translates directly to smoking mirror. It refers to kind of like the obsidian glass that they would use as a mirror. If you think about back in the day, in ancient Greek and Roman times, they would have bronze mirrors and things like that, and then they had silver mirrors in the 17, 1800s. Well, they used obsidian. And he had so many titles. He to whom we are all slaves, the night wind, possessor of the sky and earth, enemy of both sides, lord of the near and far, maker of things, the great demon, the night. He had many, many, many names. Great demon, by the way, translates directly to owl man, but that's just weird. And while I am mainly talking about him as referred to by the Aztecs, and by the way, I want to specify that for a second. I say Aztecs because this is the commonly used term. It's the one most often used by modern speakers. You'll often hear people say that's not what they were called. That's true, and it's not. They did use that term back in the day, but it referred to different things. The group that is most often called Aztecs are the Mexica, were the one of three cultures that were basically running all of central Mexico. It was the Triple Alliance. They were just the ones in charge. Right? So I'm using that term most often. But Tezcatlipoca has parallels in many other cultures. He was Coil for the classic Maya. The Quiche Maya called him Huracan, which translates to the one leg. And the Yucatec Maya, Bolan Sit Acab. And each of these have similar things. He's got only one leg. Sometimes it's a mirror, sometimes it's a snake, sometimes it's a bunch of snakes. But regardless, he's definitely a powerful and scary god, one who you must respect and fear. But when I talk about Aztec gods, the one that is most often referred to is Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. And again, he also has many names depending on the culture. We have Quetzalcoatl, Gucumatz, Kukulkan. All of those things translate to feathered serpent. So it's all the same thing. He's also called by other names, and one that I often hear is Tzeacatl, which is a birthday, one read, and our prince. Basically, he was born on Earth as a human and ruled a kingdom. I say birthday. For many of the cultures in Mesoamerica, you would get your birth name, not so much when you're born, but more or less when you are baptized, so to speak. But rather than being baptized in the water, they would put the little baby's feet into masa. So it'd be like basically making tortillas and put the baby there. And they say, depends on the culture, but I like to think there's some holy tortillas out there. We'll talk about Tzeacatl. He was the ruler of Tolan, and this story is the one that is often told because it was the story that Cortez and the subsequent rulers of Mexico during the colonial period loved to tell. Basically, he was born, said to be the son of gods, Mixcoatl and Chimalman, and he took control, or was selected to be in control, of Tolan. And while there, he said things like, we shouldn't be doing human sacrifices anymore. There are other ways to honor the gods, and we need to be nice to each other, and all those things. You can see that while we get this story now in a post-colonial era, it's probably heavily influenced by the priests that were writing it down. They definitely wanted it to sound Christian. And there is a story about how he left and would come back, and the Spaniards always say, oh, they said the story that he had a beard and he would come back, and they saw us and they thought we were kings and gods, and there's contradictory stuff on that, but more than likely they didn't think they were gods for more than 2 seconds. The story goes by many of the people that were there that, well, the Spaniards just smelled really, really badly. And one of the things that the Spaniards said is they were given flowers when they first arrived, and they thought that was honoring them, when the belief by a lot of other people nowadays is like they were probably just trying to cover up the smell of people who bathed once a month. But how he lost that rulership is interesting to me. It depends on the variation of the story, but in the variation I'm focusing on here, Tezcatlipoca was upset that he had changed the traditions and wanted to fix this. And so he disguised himself as an old man and went to go give his offerings to the ruler. And he got the ruler, our prince, really, really drunk on pulque. And also his sister, Quetzalcoatl. So he and his sister got really, really drunk and did things that brothers and sisters shouldn't do. So when they woke up, he was ashamed of himself and said he was not able to be ruler. And they say that he left by boat and went off to the sea. In some versions, he burned himself on the ocean. Other versions, he'll come back one day. Again, it's a story that was perpetuated by Spaniard colonists, but it does predate. So it's kind of like, take bits and pieces. Regardless, with him gone, Tezcatlipoca was able to restore traditions, bring back human sacrifices. And I talk about human sacrifices. One of the things that the colonists liked to do was really paint the indigenous cultures as if they were savages and that they would mutilate bodies and they would kill people. We just had a whole presentation about how the Catholics like keeping body parts in every one of their buildings. All right, so it's just about how you paint somebody you don't like. All right. I do want to point out that Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, while they are often seen as adversaries, are just as often seen as allies. Often they are described as brothers, although again it depends on the version of that story. And one of their most famous stories together is the reason why Tezcatlipoca has one leg. And that is that as they were trying to form the universe together, and they needed a world in which people could live, they fought the giant monster Cipactli and tore her apart, using her body parts as the earth. Now, she's still alive, which is why it's important to honor the earth, but she's in a lot of pain, so it's very important to honor the earth. However, to get this done, Tezcatlipoca had to distract her long enough for Quetzalcoatl to take care of her. And the way he distracted her was by dangling his leg in front of her, and she bit it off. So in all subsequent depictions, one leg. Although some statues have no legs, they'll both be snakes and stuff. I just think that story's cool. The other thing is, we talked about them possibly being brothers, depends on the version of it. One of the, usually referred to as a later story by the Nahuatl people, that are the Mexica, is, and by the way, I don't speak Nahuatl. You know, it's not a language I'm very good at. I have a lot of friends that do, and that's cool. I go to them whenever I'm like, what does this mean? But I just, armchair linguist, all right? But there were, depending on the version of the story, 4 creator gods that were all basically created from the same parent gods, essentially making them brothers. Quetzalcoatl, Huitzilopochtli, Xipetotec, and Tezcatlipoca. We have Quetzalcoatl, who is, at different points, different things. In this particular image, he's represented as the god of air. We have Huitzilopochtli, who is usually described as the god of war, although it depends on how you want to. We say god of, it's a very Eurocentric view of it, but you know, they definitely had dominions that they would keep track of. And Xipetotec is one of my favorites because we know almost the least about him of all the really important gods, but we do know what he looked like, and that is he wore the skin of other people. Fun. And then we have Tezcatlipoca, who I've already described. The reason I say, however, that while these 4 gods created the universe, Tezcatlipoca is probably the most powerful, is that these 4 gods are often called the 4 Tezcatlipocas. Each one is given a color that matches a direction. All right, so we got white, blue, red, and black, each one representing a direction, black being the direction toward the underworld, which I believe is west. I can't remember that right now. I have to look that up. They are also very instrumental in the 5 suns, which I'm sure is something anybody who's heard anything about the Aztecs has probably heard about, that they had 5 versions of reality, basically 5 attempts at making a good earth that worked. The first one was done by Tezcatlipoca himself, and it didn't work out too well because he could not make the sun bright enough to be a successful thing for people to grow in. The people of this world were giants, and they weren't very good at being servants to the gods, so they weren't really well respected. So Quetzalcoatl destroyed them, and Tezcatlipoca was so upset that his toys were destroyed that he turned into a giant jaguar and just ate the earth. Take that, Fantastic Four. Then we have the second son, made by Quetzalcoatl. He was trying to do the same. The people, however, were very greedy, something that Tezcatlipoca liked to point out several times. Your people suck too. So they got turned into monkeys. This pissed off Quetzalcoatl so much that he destroyed everything. The next one is Tlaloc, who is a god of the storm, god of rains. And he also wanted to make a great world, but he was a bit distracted in that Tezcatlipoca stole his wife. All right? Xochiquetzal is basically a love goddess of sexual power and beauty, and he's like, hey, you and I should get together. And Tlaloc was so upset he cried, and remember, he's a storm god, so he cried rains of fire. Not really sure how that applies to the storm god, but whatever. He burned everything, and it got destroyed. However, survivors were turned into birds. And then the next one is Tlaloc's second wife took over and became the next son. I have trouble with her name so much. Chalchilicu, his wife. Now, she was doing a great job, but Tezcatlipoca was jealous again and decided to just keep whispering in her ear over and over and over again until she finally felt she was doing a horrible job. She started crying and just flooded the earth. What I think is interesting is that in some versions of this story, Tezcatlipoca went and found one man and one woman and tried to hide them away in a tree because he really wanted to make humanity happen. But the gods found out they were hiding, and they got turned into dogs. In my head, these are werewolves. I don't know why. And then we get to the modern world by Huitzilopochtli, who is usually seen as the patron god of the Aztecs, the patron god of Tenochtitlan. And that is the world we live in today. What I think is really neat about this, by the way, just side point, is that there's so many parallels in other cultures. For a lot of the Maya cultures, it's 4 worlds. Also, the Hopi culture had 4 worlds, and the culture that we call the Inca also had 4 worlds. You know. So he was very, very important for all these reasons, creating the earth, no matter which side you go with it, creating the universe, And I mentioned already one of his wives. He had 4. Again, very powerful, very popular guy. Agreed. We have Xilonin. And by the way, I already said that my language is not super great. Usually when you see the X, it's usually going to be a sound. And you see a TL, especially if it's at the end, it's kind of like you're just starting to say bottle but not finishing it. So just imagine that I was saying it much better than I was. Xilonin is a goddess of corn. Specifically, she's a goddess of young corn, because there were 3 goddesses. You can compare it to the European idea of the maiden and the mother and the crone. But they have the young goddess, they have the ripe corn, and then they have the dried corn, which is already being prepared for stuff. And she was the young corn. We have Xochitl, who I already mentioned earlier. She is the twin brother of the god of flowers, Xochipilli. She has a twin brother who's the god of flowers. There we go. And then we have Wixto Siwat, who is the goddess of salt, and she also runs her own heaven. Everybody always talks about the underworld of Mesoamerica. Whenever you see a movie about it, there's always like Coco or Book of Life or whatever, which I love those movies, by the way. They always focus on the underworld, which they had 9 of. They had 13 heavens, and she had 1 of them. Yeah. And then we have Atlantonan, who we know the least about. We know she was a water goddess. Don't really get a lot of details. A lot of the stuff that we have, again, the Spaniards did a really good job of burning stuff and shutting people up. Every so many generations, there'd be a priest really urgently trying to write stuff down, and then there'd be somebody else burning it again. So we got those 4 wives, and he also gets credit for bringing music to the world, depending on the version of the story. And one of the versions, he had ordered musicians from the sun to come down to earth, and his nieces, who were water goddesses, were going to build a bridge from the sun to the earth. And he told them, come directly, don't get distracted, don't just start playing music, because I know you want to do that. But they started playing music. Humans heard this and started replicating it, and they realized, hey, this is a really good way to pray to the gods. So, bonus for them, I guess. And then he has this flower flute, which symbolizes not only him, but just that idea of music that goes to the gods in general. And it's literally a flute with 4 holes in it that looks like a flower at the end. Actually, while I have this death whistle, I wish I knew what this sounded like, because I have no idea. All right, so I mentioned already that Quetzalcoatl shows up a lot in pop culture. More and more, Tezcatlipoca is as well, which I like. I have a friend, Gonzalo Alvarez, who made a game called Nawali. Basically, it's like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, except entirely made with Nahua Mexica mythology, which I really love. Definitely check it out. It's on the web. You can order it. But I asked him specifically to send me these because we have both Tezcatlipoca. By the way, he spells them phonetically in English so that it makes it easier for kids to learn to say these words. And then you also have one of his aspects, which is the Nite jaguar. And we have another one of his aspects, Yowal Topisli. I want you to imagine for a minute that for some weird reason, you are walking through the woods in the middle of the night, and you just hear getting closer and closer to you. It is the chopping sound of the night axe. And as it gets up to you, you see a man, large and imposing, with no head, opening up his chest, and you can see the beating heart right in front of you. Real quick question, if that happened to you, what would you do? Anybody run? Okay, well, you're dead, sorry. The correct answer is stick your arm right in there and pull that heart out. All right? And you're supposed to tell him you'll give it back to him if he gives you rewards. And he will give you agave seeds, depending on how much you can negotiate from him, and each one represents a success you will have later. So, yeah, it's not too bad. Even corpse coming at you in the middle of the night could be a good thing. Right? But also an aspect of Tezcatlipoca, which I like. I will say, a lot of the gods have multiple aspects. So, for example, I already said Quetzalcoatl is the wind, and Tezcatlipoca is the night wind. So a lot of them have different aspects. All right. But this is about relics. So let's get back to the actual relic, the Mask of Tezcatlipoca. So we are venerating the gods and not the people. But whenever I talk to people about lucha, and I did that book about luchadors earlier, I mentioned that when you see a mask, they're not hiding their identity. They're showing you who they really are. And this is something that goes back before the Spaniards ever got there. That this is something that when you put on a mask, you are showing your true power. And you could put on the mask to become the god. So we have Teomama, who is somebody whose job it is to carry an effigy of a god, and Ixipla, who is somebody who becomes that god. And apotheosis just means to become a god. I just think that's a fun word. There's what it looks like in the back. The only picture I could find online of that in the back. So the Ixiplatli, I've been practicing this all day, and I could totally have said it just 30 minutes ago, of Tezcatlipoca, is chosen as being the most handsome young man they could find. If there's so much as a mole out of place, that's not a good person to use. So they find a good-looking guy. And then they dress him up as the god, and they teach him to speak like a god. They teach him to play the flute like a god. For, depending on the version of the story, either a year or 4 years, he is treated as if he was the god on earth. Like, literally, when he plays the flute, and you hear that flute coming through town, get ready to start bowing, right? If he asks for something, give it to him. If he says, I don't think you should do that, don't do that, all right? That is God on earth, all right? Who is chosen for this depends. A couple of the theories are, I say theories, these are things said by some of the Spaniards, that they were either slaves or prisoners of war, depending on who you ask. But I will say, it is very likely, at different times, people volunteered for this. We're going to get to that in a bit. As I said earlier, they were taught to act as the god, and they got to be that god. And since they are Tezcatlipoca, well, not only do they learn to play the flute and get respected and tell the king what to do, literally, the king will announce you are the new Tezcatlipoca, and then you get to tell the king what to do, which is cool. You also get 4 wives. So these women are also picked to be the most beautiful and most perfect, and are also trained to act as gods on earth, we think. The Spaniards didn't think it was important enough to mention other than they exist. But for the amount of time that he was Tezcatlipoca, they would also have been Xilonin, Huisto Sihuat, Alatonin, and Xochiquetzal. They don't actually meet him to become his wives until, like, well, we'll get to that. But yeah, so they probably looked really cool. Don't know. So all of this leads up to the month of Toxcat. They had 18 months of, this is the 5th one of the 18 months. This is called, the Spaniards call it Veintenas. Veintenas, there we go, sorry. Again, jumping back and forth languages is tricky. And in the 5th month, it was a month meant to honor Tezcatlipoca. And they would have a massive party, basically. People from all over would come around, and this would culminate in the wedding of Tezcatlipoca and his 4 wives. This is about a couple weeks before, several days before the end of the month. And they'd have a great ceremony, big party, people come dance in the street, all that stuff. And at the end of that party, Tezcatlipoca is done. We are going to kill him. But I say that because all accounts are he walks of his own accord up the pyramid, breaking his flower flute a little bit by little bit as he walks up, lays down on the stone, and then has his heart pulled out. What happens to the ladies, we don't know. Some versions of the story, they are also sacrificed. Other versions, they abandon him ceremonially right before he goes up. Other versions, they are hoped to have been impregnated, so they are going to have children of God eventually. Anyway, but big question is, why would you volunteer for this? Well, for one thing, and I'll get back to that in a second. For one thing, we have religion. I mean, we just talked about the Catholics a second ago, and all the things they do. And there are people who will do a lot of stuff for religion, right? But for another, they're literally treated like a god on earth for the whole time up to that point. Like anything they want. I mean, for today's terms, you get to be a billionaire for a year with all of that, all that comes with that, and every world leader has to bow to you. All right. Anyway, this is Toxcat, but I want to point out this one right here, the Alvarado massacre. So after the Spaniards took over and imprisoned Moctezuma, the Mexica and also Moctezuma himself said, hey, this is a very important ceremony to us. It means a lot to us religiously. We would like to do the Toscat ceremony. Can we do that? After a lot of grumbling, the deputy governor, Alvarado, said sure, but no weapons. And we're going to only do it within the walls of this particular area. So all the nobles and the dancers and the chosen people are there, while everybody else in the streets is still dancing as well, because they were at least having this, all right? But as the ceremony was going on, before the night could even finish, Spaniards started killing people. Why that is? Weirdly, if you look it up, there are two versions of it. There's the Spaniard version and there's the Mexica version, and they both say the Spaniards did it for no reason. So I'm not sure why they call it two versions. But the Spaniards were pretty sure they were probably going to try something. And the Mexica were like, they just got upset at us. So either way, it was pretty bad. And this led to Noche Triste, which was when the Mexica rose up and basically told the Spaniards to leave. So we got that. All right. This, I just want to real quickly go through the history of it, because there is a historian, Marjorie Cagle, that actually went through and tried to track the skull back as far as she could. It was probably among the loot stolen by Hernan Cortez, probably lost by the Spaniards at some point. I love this one. Belonged to a covenant of nuns. And that's the only, that quote right there is the only quote we have about that. We don't know any more of the information there. Went to one guy's collection, went to another guy named Bram Hertz. It's part of what's called the Hertz collection today. But this guy, Joseph Mayer, was very jealous of him, called him fat and lazy and oily for some reason. But then got the collection from him. And then it went to another guy. And then that guy, when he died, gave it to the British Museum, and it's still there today. All right. Real quick comic book connection. Everybody see Daredevil, the TV show? Karen Page, Daredevil's sometimes girlfriend in the comics, her dad got the skull and went insane from radiation. I guess I don't know how those things are connected exactly. And it gave him powers, like turning his horse's skin invisible, which has got to be messed up for that horse. And he became Death's Head for all of 2 issues, then died. But I just think that's cool. All right. So back to the question: would you wear it? And for you guys, any questions?
All right, thank you very much. Okay, what questions? Okay.
Is it okay if I ask 2?
Nope.
Okay.
We'll come back. Ask your first.
Okay. So, Quetzal has a bird and a pterosaur named for it. Do you know if there's any animals or anything named for the other gods?
Yes and no. The Quetzal bird is named for its feathers. Quetzal, the word for the Mexica was basically like saying precious, and the feathers represented everything important. And so that bird is just the most important feathers come from that bird. So when we say whenever you see Quetzal in the name, that basically means precious feather, although literally it could also come from that bird. As far as things named after the other gods, I'm not certain directly. I do know that one of the other Alamo Draft House bars is called the 400 Rabbits, and it's named after the gods on my shirt, which are these guys as well. Xochitl was probably one of those gods, being one of the rabbits. So we got different things. I'm not sure that really answers that question, other than the Quetzal bird is the bird where they got the feathers that would have been used in a lot of the headdresses and stuff.
You said you have a children's book. What ages is it appropriate for?
So it is intended to be a middle grade reader, which I guess means middle school essentially, maybe upper elementary through middle school. I am a high school teacher, and I wrote it to be a little bit more mature in terms of their behavior and attitudes. The idea being that I know my students, when I teach freshmen, for example, want to think they're seniors. So I figured a middle school student would want to think that they're more mature. So there's nothing like, definitely nothing inappropriate for middle school, but just the idea is that I try to treat it very seriously, even though the cartoony art there, I think, kind of balances it out. So it is that. And I also have several copies here if anybody wants to buy one from me during the break.
Absolutely. Amy?
So, would you wear the mask yourself?
So would I choose to be the god for a year, knowing what would happen at the end?
Yes.
Nah.
All right then.
But I do think, like I said, I feel like if we used today's terms on that and we said you could be treated as a billionaire who all the world leaders had to listen to for a whole year, but at the end of that year you're going to a very painful death, would you take it? I think there's a lot of people that would probably take that.
Isn't it more than that, though? I mean, it's more like being treated like Jesus for a year.
I mean, essentially, yeah. But
Yeah.
I say all the world leaders because in terms of the area, pretty much every city-state in that area would consider him God. So by today's terms, that'd be the world. So.
Is Donald Trump wearing the mask now?
You know what's really funny? I gave a talk not too long ago about Death Note, which is a manga. And in one of the most recent Death Note comics, Donald Trump tries to purchase it so he can kill anyone he wants. And the Death God literally says, nah, you don't get it, and then walked away. So I'm like, that's just interesting to me. Yeah, that's all I got on that one.
Well, that's how we know the Death Note doesn't exist. Because
Yeah, because who says no to him?
right. Any more questions? Last question.
I will have some books and some comics. I don't have the Aztec comic right now, but I have a superhero comic that I made, and if anybody wants to check it out, come talk to me.